So time for us to have a look at the big political stories of the day. And former British lawmaker Lord Peter Hain is urging the South African government to go after several international banks and companies which he accuses of being complicit in state capture. He says they enabled the corruption and money laundering which cost the economy billions of rands.
Now, this is a fair statement to make, right? Because he's also accused the institutions of protecting alleged criminals like the Gupta family by hiding behind the client confidentiality clause. And joining us in studio now is political analyst and good friend of the show's, Tessa Dooms, to help us delve deeper into this. Maybe let's start off with your thoughts before we ask you any questions.
Yeah, so I think it was an interesting intervention, especially because it's coming from somebody who's coming from the UK, citing a lot of UK law, international law, setting kind of a precedent for what actually constitutes a state capture. And in the first week of this commission, that was one of the things that was unpacked. What are we actually talking about? And I think what his testimony did yesterday is it kind of broadened the ambit of what we're thinking about. So we're not just thinking about a corrupt relationship between a family and the state or between individuals and a state. We're talking about a systemic corruption. And we're talking about a systemic corruption that's not just corrupt in general ways, but in the ways in which it infringes on the state and the state's powers. And I thought that was an interesting way to approach this, but I do think it's going to be a bit of a conundrum for the Commission to figure out what do we do with this. Because, you know, investigation is going to be required here to see what are the lengths to which this has happened in our case particularly.
So now, the new South Africa, right? The post-democratic South Africa is founded on state capture. In fact, by that very definition, family relationships, people who had money, people who then influence the state and the party, that's what we founded on. So if we're investigating state capture, fine. Let's not even go back to the 1600s. Let's just stay here and keep it in the 90s. You've got a big problem.
Absolutely. And our country has a small elite. And so there's going to be a few big families and trusts and people and companies that have the ability to monopolize. And we've seen the reason why the term white monopoly capital exists is because our country has got endemic monopolization of a lot of sectors. And so, yeah, we're going to have to start thinking about what do we do with the fact that this is a part of the system. And I think he rightfully pointed out yesterday that while the Guptas pose a really big problem in the way in which things unfolded, they are only the tip of the iceberg. They are a small part of the ways in which all of this has been happening. And I think it was good that we saw, for instance, the Bosasa thing organically come up through this, because that shows us that it wasn't just about the Guptas. This is about relationships. And we need to talk about the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts and all of that. Sounds like rhetoric from the EFF. But on a lot of levels, it's extremely true. If you think about the range of assets and the range of money and the relationship, even in the dawn of democracy, between families like the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers and the ANC government in negotiating some of that apartheid debt, there's a real case to be made that there's an endemic problem. And the highlighting of the banks, I think, is a very interesting way of thinking about it as well.
Because that's what I was going to say. He's then saying and the corruptees, so in this instance, private individuals with means, be it power or money, and those who are in the public service have access to public power. But you must also look at the facilitators. We spoke about the auditors, people, and I mean the auditing profession has had a tough 2 to 3 years, saying we must also look at the banks. This then broadly brings into question, for instance, countries that are tax havens. This is why the Panama Papers were so important about really what we're seeing play out here is this global phenomenon of power, whatever power it has been, monetary or political, using whatever means available to it to, you know, evade the law, not pay what is due, etc., and saying, but we must begin to deal with it at that level. Yes, it happened in South Africa, but now we've seen the US Treasury State Department act. Why hasn't the UK acted? Why hasn't Dubai acted? Why haven't all the other countries that we may not even know about, why haven't they acted? Because that's essentially how crime happens. Yes, there's a particular place it starts, but he's saying, but what about all the other places where these crimes or the proceeds of the crimes ended up?
Yeah. So the free marketers in the country are not going to like Peter Hain's testimony at all yesterday, because he called for heavy regulation of banks. He's saying that banks have way too much discriminatory power to withhold information from the state, to withhold information from each other, that makes it possible for criminals to money launder, for criminals to get away with doing a lot of things that legitimize ill-gotten gains. And not ill-gotten gains because you went to go and rob a bank, but ill-gotten gains because of these corrupt relationships that you have, but also because of the money laundering, of course, that comes with that. And I think that the regulation of the banks, in light of the state capture inquiry, the banks only stood up when there was a huge reputational risk through the Guptas. If that never happened, would we ever have known? Would we ever have gotten to the point where the banks say, hey guys, this is what's been happening in our space? And so they were protecting themselves, not the country. And it goes back to a conversation I think we had a few weeks ago about unpatriotic capital in the country, where big companies and banks and auditors will let things slide as long as it's profitable for them, doesn't cause them reputational risk, even if it's doing harm to the country, and that requires accountability, if nothing else.
So here's a big question for everybody at home. Is this problem unique to us as South Africans only? Because, I mean, even if you think about America, right, you got people like Rockefeller, you got people like Carnegie. All of those people helped build America into what it is right now. And, you know, they went into banking too, funny enough. So let us know what your thoughts are at 4 or 5 mornings. Tessa, thank you very much for coming through.
Thanks for having me.